Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for today, which is September 28th, 2022. The LaRouche Organization has inaugurated the posting of a new web page to counter the official US, UK, NATO disinformation operation. You can find a link to this at the bottom of today's description page. This is necessary as the pro-war propaganda coming from the US, the UK, Brussels, dominates the major media, and any effort, such as ours, to challenge it is suppressed. There's an attack on free speech. There's an effort to silence a debate, which goes against the very constitutional tradition that we cherish in the United States. We, the LaRouche Organization, has been reporting on how the US, NATO, and the Five Eyes have participated in a censorship campaign by funding and coordinating Ukrainian institutions, the Center for Countering Disinformation and Mirotvorets, which are circulating a target list to threaten those who challenge the official London, Washington, Brussels war propaganda narrative. A blatant example of this push ahead was the shameless presentation at the UN General Assembly by New Zealand's Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who called for the creation of a global censorship system. Now remember, New Zealand is part of the Five Eyes, that is the British-based intelligence coordination. And she called for what is essentially a global ministry of truth, to combat what she called, quote, new weapons of war, unquote. In other words, the disinformation campaign. Now, she said that even the light touch of censorship can be misinterpreted as hostility to free speech. But so what? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about. She's saying it's necessary to have that censorship. Well, why is there censorship? Why would they do this? Because opposition to the war policy is growing. We see it every day now in the streets of Europe. There was a new poll in the United States that came out which said 61% are in favor of diplomacy rather than war. And meanwhile, the US is continuing to commit more money, more billions of dollars to weapons in Ukraine for the war, when the families of American servicemen are having to live on food stamps to provide food for their children. Now, in this context of the censorship and the anti-democratic activities in support of war, we have an update on the Supreme Court hearing in Kiev, which I reported on 2 days ago. The Supreme Court upheld the ban against the Progressive Socialist Party of Ukraine. That is, the appeal that was filed by the PSPU was rejected. This outlaws the party. There have been 16 opposition parties which have been banned by the Ministry of Justice in Ukraine, 4 of which were challenged, and the Supreme Court overturned the challenge and upheld the ruling to ban them. This is a violation of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, which prohibits retroactive enforcement of laws. It also violates Ukraine's constitution. And yet, it not only happened, but there was almost no response or no reporting of this in the West. Now, meanwhile, the war danger escalates daily, including related to the explosions which were reported in the last days at the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines. Radek Sikorski, who's the former Polish foreign minister, sent out a tweet about these explosions with the headline, "Thank you, USA." He retweeted a video of Biden from February 7th when Biden said, quote, "If Russia invades Ukraine, there will no longer be a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it," end quote. A reporter asked, how would that be done since the project has been done under German control? Biden showed the Western contempt to German sovereignty when he replied, quote, "I promise you, we'll be able to do it," unquote. Well, was the pipeline attacked by the US and NATO? The suspicion certainly is there, And they certainly possessed the capability, and they were engaging in practicing for just this kind of thing last summer with what was called Balt Ops, military exercises. All this does is increase the danger of escalation. Meanwhile, the referenda in the 4 provinces of Ukraine have been completed. The question is, what happens now? Will sanity prevail? Will there be an effort for a diplomatic settlement or not? We're coming up on the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis from October 1962, when the world came close, probably closer than ever before, to nuclear war over the Soviet placement of nuclear weapons in Cuba, 90 miles off the coast of Florida and the United States, and with easy distance reach to Washington, D.C. Now, Kennedy reacted to this in the same way Putin reacted to the encroachments by NATO on Russian territory. That is, Kennedy said, it's not accepted and we will not accept it, and set up a blockade around Cuba to stop further deployment of Soviet missiles and threatened to attack those missiles if the Russians did not remove them. Meanwhile, there was an extensive back-channel effort, coordinated to some extent by Robert Kennedy, the president's brother, which ultimately ended with both sides agreeing to remove missiles, the Soviets from Cuba and the US from Turkey. But more importantly, Kennedy saw this as a potential to begin a move toward détente, that is, to have the kind of peace talks which would end the enmity between the US and the Soviets, end the Cold War threats, end the idea of having to choose between blocs, and inaugurate a new era of peace and cooperation. Now, so the move to de-escalate actually moved toward a peace settlement. And Kennedy spoke about this in a very famous speech he gave on June 10th, 1963 at American University, which was titled A Strategy for Peace. In this talk, Kennedy acknowledged the Soviet sacrifices in World War II, which he said were not generally recognized by the United States. And he called for a, quote, re-examination of American attitudes towards Russia, unquote. He added that adopting policies which could lead to nuclear confrontation would be, quote, evidence only of the bankruptcy of our policy or of a collective death wish for the world, unquote. Very clear statement from him. Now, I would urge you to let his words in that speech guide us as we seek to move back from the brink of nuclear war today, as we look for the possibility for diplomatic solutions, as opposed to an escalation which ultimately, most likely, will lead to a nuclear confrontation which could end with the annihilation of the human race. Here's what Kennedy said in that speech. Quote, "For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures. And we are all mortal."